So God's giving these exact instructions, knowing that if put together, not everything fits. Some things overlap. Some things will have to fold over. Some things are covered more. Some things are covered less. That reminds us of what Paul says about some parts of the body are honored more than others. Some parts are covered more. Some parts are covered less. Welcome back to Embrace the Question. It's good to be with you today. I hope you're all doing well, blessed, and ready to settle in and do a little bit of Bible study with me. We're doing our Bible Study with Me series. We're going through Exodus. We're in chapter 26, so we're getting close to the end. The end is in sight. But Exodus 26 is a pretty long chapter. It's got a lot of detail in it. This is the building of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting. And there are a lot of little fine intricacies that Moses is being instructed to do. He's still on top of the mountain. He's still got his iPad out taking notes or scribbling on his arm. I don't know how he's doing this, other than the fact that maybe God is revealing to him supernaturally the plan of heaven, showing him the actual objects in the heavenlies and helping him to remember. But we're talking about a lot of numbers here, a lot of important colors. And that's what we're going to focus on today, is some of the symbolism. There are a lot of people out there that are more expert in the tabernacle and the tabernacle furniture than I. But I will say this. I know enough to know that unless you are really versed in the finished work of Christ, you cannot be a complete expert in the tabernacle, because the tabernacle is foreshadowing patterns to come. It is giving us pictures of things to come. And I hope to be able to tap into a little bit of that as we go. So let's start out with Exodus 26. Strap in, get you a notepad and a pen. Be prepared to take a few little notes here and there for those things that really grab you. Let's get going. Okay, as always, reading from the English Standard Version here. We might flip over if we need to a different translation, but let's start. Verse 1. Moreover, you shall make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of fine twined linen, and blue and purple and scarlet yarns. You shall make them with cherubim skillfully worked into them. Let's stop. I'm not going to stop it at the end of every verse naturally, or we'll never get through. But this one is starting out big because we're talking about blue, scarlet. We're talking about fine linen. These things all become synonymous with the priesthood. The priesthood. Fine linen, blue, scarlet. Think priesthood. Think Luke 16. Luke chapter 16, I believe it is. Mark has a version of this too, but it's talking about the rich man and Lazarus, where Lazarus lifts up Lazarus dies, and they both go into the center of the earth, Abraham's bosom for Lazarus and Hades for the rich man. And it says the rich man is dressed in purple and fine linen. The rich man is a priest. And most people don't realize that because they are not versed in Exodus. But this is important because this might explain why the priesthood, very quickly after Lazarus's resurrection, the priesthood is wanting to kill him. The priesthood doesn't like Lazarus. Lazarus may have worked for the priesthood. Interesting. Exodus 26, verse 2. The length of each curtain shall be 28 cubits, and the breadth of each curtain 4 cubits, and all the curtains shall be the same size. 5 curtains shall be coupled with one another, and the other 5 curtains shall be coupled to one another. Okay, so 5. Notice the numerology. 5 is not only something to do with the law because it's Torah, the 5 books of Torah, but it translates into grace in the new covenant, the 5-fold ministry. All right, so 5 is important. Verse 4, and you shall make loops of blue on the edge of the outermost curtain in the first set. Likewise, you shall make loops on the edge of the outermost curtain in the second set. All right, lots of little details. Verse 5, 50 loops you shall make on the one curtain, and 50 loops shall you make on the edge of the curtain that is in the second set. The loops shall be opposite one another. Now we have 50s. 50s will remind you of Pentecost. And that is coming up here, this celebration of Pentecost, or the celebration of Feast of Weeks, 50 days, 49 days plus a Sabbath. It's incorporated in the building of the tabernacle here. So verse 6, and you shall make 50 clasps of gold, and couple the curtains one to the other with the clasps, so that the tabernacle may be a single whole. Everything significant. Everything's joined together. Verse 7, you shall also make curtains of goat's hair for a tent over the tabernacle. 11 curtains shall you make. You've seen the camping tents where you have the tent and then you put a rain fly over the top. That's what is happening here in effect. You have an outer tent, an outer shell. The length of each curtain shall be 30 cubits, and the breadth of each curtain 4 cubits. The 11 curtains shall be the same size. Why 11? This is crazy. Why 11? Where do we see 11 again? Well, once Judas is out of the picture, where we have 11 disciples left. So there is a significance to an 11. Verse 9, you shall couple 5 curtains by themselves and 6 curtains by themselves. And the 6th curtain you shall double over at the front of the tent. All right. You shall make 50 loops on the edge of the curtain that is outermost in one set, and 50 loops on the edge of the curtain that is outermost in the second set. Hope you're taking notes. You shall make 50 clasps of bronze, and put the clasps into the loops and couple the tent together that it may be a single whole. He's emphasizing, yes, you're having to put this together, but the parts will make the whole. The parts will make the whole. That kind of reminds us of the body of Christ. Many parts, but they comprise a whole, okay? Verse 12, and the part that remains of the curtain or the curtains of the tent, the half curtain that remains shall hang over the back of the tabernacle. And the extra that remains in the length of the curtains, the cubit on the one side and the cubit on the other side, shall hang over the sides of the tabernacle on this side and that side to cover it. So God's giving these exact instructions, knowing that if put together, not everything fits. Some things overlap. Some things will have to fold over. Some things are covered more. Some things are covered less. That reminds us of what Paul says about some parts of the body are honored more than others. Some parts are covered more. Some parts are covered less. Okay, verse 14. And you shall make for the tent a covering of tanned ram's skins and a covering of goat skins on top. You shall make upright frames for the tabernacle of acacia wood. 10 cubits shall be the length of a frame, and a cubit and a half the breadth of each frame. Remember, a cubit, the space for a male between the wrist and the elbow. So approximately 1.5 feet for us Greek thinkers. Verse 17, there shall be 2 tenons in each frame for fitting together. So shall you do for all the frames of the tabernacle. You shall make the frames for the tabernacle, 20 frames for the south side. And 40 bases of silver you shall make under the 20 frames. 2 bases under one frame for its 2 tenons, and 2 bases under the next frame for its 2 tenons. And for the second side of the tabernacle on the north side, 20 frames, and their 40 bases of silver, 2 bases under one frame and 2 bases under the next frame. We're talking about just the framework of the tent. Tenons, you may, if you're a woodworker, you're very familiar with mortise and tenon. A mortise being the hole that you put a tenon in to create a joint and hold things tight. So all of this is very detailed. Again, how Moses did it, right? Verse 22, let's start. And for the rear of the tabernacle westward, you shall make 6 frames, and you shall make 2 frames for corners of the tabernacle in the rear. They shall be separate beneath, but joined at the top, at the first ring. Thus shall it be with both of them. They shall form the 2 corners. And there shall be 8 frames with their bases of silver, 16 bases, 2 bases under one frame and 2 bases under another frame. All right, verse 26, you shall make bars of acacia wood, 5 for the frames of the one side of the tabernacle, 5 bars for the frames on the other side of the tabernacle, and 5 bars for the frames on the side of the tabernacle at the rear westward. The middle bar halfway up the frames shall run from end to end. So the only real way to do this, to get an accurate mental image of what's going on, is to download some pictures of what people think this really looked like. And there are some great pictures out there. I'll throw one up here just so you can kind of see. This is highly detailed, everything with intent. God is amazing. And why every last measurement? The 5s, the 6s. You noticed a 40 in there. 40 is, you may have it as the number of testing. Really, it's the number of a cycle. 40. You're tested through the full cycle. That's your generation is 40. Your testing is 40. Everything is counted in 40s almost, it seems like, in especially the Old Covenant. So I think of 40 as a complete cycle of something. All right, verse 29. You shall overlay the frames with gold and shall make their rings of gold for holders for the bars, and you shall overlay the bars with gold. Wow. Then you shall erect the tabernacle according to the plan for it that you were shown on the mountain. No small pressure for Moses here. And you shall make a veil of blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen. Again, same imagery. It shall be made with cherubim skillfully worked into it. And you shall hang it on the 4 pillars of acacia overlaid with gold, with hooks of gold on 4 bases of silver. And you shall hang the veil from the clasps and bring the ark of the testimony in there within the veil. And the veil shall separate for you the holy place from the most holy place. All right, let me stop there. We mentioned early that part of the understanding of this whole setup is also being familiar with the finished work of Christ. There is a holy place, and there is a most holy place, and then there is an outer courtyard. Okay, there's different people that can access different parts, and you probably know that, and we're going to cover more of that as it goes, because not all of that has been given to us as a rule yet. But we find out that women during that day can only go so far, and non-Levites during that day can only go so far. So you have to be a priest to gain entry into certain parts, and then to gain entry into the most holy place, you have to be a high priest, right? And that's separated with a veil. And we know that when Christ died, that veil in the temple of Herod split from top to bottom. This thing was a foot thick and 20 feet high. You couldn't tear it with a tractor or a team of oxen. But God split this thing, thus removing the separation between him and us, removing the separation, in effect, kind of releasing the most holy place, not allowing everybody in, but making everything it. It's completely crazy to think about what God did. But there's also these levels of understanding that we can attain. And this is where it really gets interesting, because these levels of understanding, we can stay outside of the tabernacle looking in and still be God's people. That's the way it was. You didn't have to gain entry to be his. In effect, the tabernacle was there for everybody. Whether you could go in or not, he wanted to be there in your midst. So it was for everybody. And that's the way it still is. God's presence is for everybody, whether you want to enter his presence or not. So there's that level of understanding. You can stay outside the courtyard and be happy, just knowing that he's there. Or you can press in to an inner court or an outer court understanding. There's an inner court or a holy place understanding of God. And there is a holy of holies understanding of God. And nobody's limited. It just depends on how much you want to pursue him. How close are you willing to get to him? He's opened it all up. That's the beauty of it. But until you understand these little separations that are initially in place, it's hard to appreciate any one of them. You shall put the mercy seat on the ark of the testimony in the most holy place. And you shall set the table outside the veil, and the lampstand on the south side of the tabernacle opposite the table, and you shall put the table on the north side. Everything, remember, a reconstruction of the garden. Maybe this is how the garden was laid out. If we could actually see a map of the garden, would it look familiar? Okay, verse 36. You shall make a screen for the entrance of the tent of blue and purple and scarlet yarns, fine twined linen, embroidered with needlework. And you shall make for the screen 5 pillars of acacia, overlay them with gold. Their hooks shall be of gold, and you shall cast 5 bases of bronze for them. We know that the garden wasn't an open thing. It was hedged in. It had a hedge surrounding it. And we know that when Adam and Eve left the garden, there was placed a gate. There is a gate to the garden. And it was guarded by cherubim. And could it be that all of this sort of portrays that design? I really think we would be surprised to know the similarities between this and the garden. And what would God be saying about it? So what would God be saying about it? Why would God have an interest in reestablishing within his people a garden? What did the garden represent to God? I think we can get a glimpse of that by just looking at history and looking at what the garden represented to men. If you look at all different cultures, where men met with God was in a garden, usually on a mountain, but it's always a garden. It represented where men and God could commune, where God could walk in the midst of his creation, the garden. That is apparently what God is reinstituting here amongst his people. He's putting his presence right back into their midst. He's done it again since then. We call it Pentecost. But this is kind of the first institution of that. His presence among us, God with us. Well, I hope this has kind of got your imagination going. It's heavy stuff. It's dry when you're just reading through it. It's hard to stay awake if you're reading this at night, to be quite honest. But hey, there's a lot of detail here that matters in the long run. So I hope you did get something from it. We'll tackle the next chapter next week. Before you go, I want you to visit my partner's website, solwaycoffee.com, SOLWAY coffee.com, and buy your Sunday school class some K-Cups or buy them some ground coffee for your Sunday school class, for your Bible study, for whatever, for your before church. Just have some coffee on hand. This is kingdom stuff. We call it the world's most anointed coffee. Okay. Hope you'll do that. Support a kingdom cause. Till next time, love you guys. Praying for you. Be blessed. Peace.